The tribal leaders of Ephraim were violently angry at Gideon. "Why didn't you send for us when you first went out to fight the Midianites?" they demanded. The soldiers of Naphtali, Asher, Zebulun, and Manasseh were called for the initial battle, but Ephraim was only asked to guard the river, which I suppose is a less glamorous job. Outside of Judah, Ephraim was the biggest and most important tribe in Israel. They didn't like being overlooked for the initial battle, especially when lesser tribes had been called into action.
Instead of scolding them, Gideon gave them the recognition they so desperately needed. "God let you capture Orab and Zeb, the generals of the army of Midian," Gideon said. "What have I done in comparison with that? Your actions at the end of the battle were more important than ours at the beginning." So they calmed down. Gideon now crossed the Jordan River with his 300 men.
They were very tired, but still chasing the enemy, including 2 Midianite kings by the names of Zebah and Zalmunna. They came to the city of Succoth, which was part of the Israelite tribe of Gad, and Gideon asked the men there for food.
"We are weary after chasing Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian," he told them. But the leaders of Succoth replied, "You haven't caught them yet. If we feed you and you fail, they will come back and destroy us." Their decision not to help Gideon turned out to be a terrible mistake. Roughly 200 years before, Moses had allowed the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh to settle on the east side of the Jordan River, as long as they promised to help their fellow Israelites conquer the Promised Land on the west side. Now, an Israelite city on the east side of the river was turning its back on their fellow countrymen. This was such a serious offense that Gideon gave them a brutal warning. "When the Lord has delivered them to us, I will return and tear your flesh with the thorns and briars of the wilderness."
Then he went up to Penuel, a city which was also part of the tribe of Gad. Gideon asked for food from them, but received the same answer. Gideon told them that he would return and break down the tower of their city. By this time King Zebah and King Zalmunna, with a remnant of 15,000 troops, were in a place called Karkor.
That was all that was left of the allied armies of the east, for 120,000 had already been killed. They must have wondered what hit them. How did the Israelites go from fearful cave dwellers to overpowering one of the toughest armies ever assembled? Then Gideon circled around the enemy, striking them with surprise raids.
The 2 kings fled, but Gideon chased and captured them, routing their entire force. Later, he captured a young fellow from Succoth and demanded that he write down the names of all the 77 political and religious leaders of the city.
He returned to Succoth and said, "You taunted me that I would never catch King Zebah and King Zalmunna, and you refused to give us food when we were hungry. Well, here they are." Then the leaders of the city were killed with wild thorns and briars, as Gideon had promised. He went to the city of Penuel and knocked down the city tower and killed the entire male population. Gideon asked the kings, "The men you killed at Mount Tabor, what were they like?" Tabor is not mentioned during the battle, so Gideon must have been talking about an isolated incident he had heard about, involving some of his family members.
They replied, "They were dressed just like you, like sons of kings." "They must have been my brothers," Gideon said. "I swear that if you hadn't killed them, I wouldn't kill you." Then he turned to Jether, his oldest son, and instructed him to kill the kings. But the boy was only a lad and was afraid to.
Then Zebah and Zalmunna said to Gideon, "You do it. We'd rather be killed by a man." To be executed by a lad would have been an embarrassing finale for these two kings. So Gideon killed them and took the ornaments from their camels' necks. Now the men of Israel said to Gideon, "Be our king. You and your sons and descendants will be our ruler, for you have saved us from Midian." But Gideon replied, "I will not be your king, nor shall my son. The Lord is your king." Gideon's humility was noble. Many commentators believe this was his finest hour. "However, I have one request. Give me all the earrings you collected from your fallen foes, for the Midianites all wore gold earrings."
And they spread out a sheet for everyone to throw in the gold earrings he had gathered. The weight of the gold rings came to 1,700 shekels, not including the crescents and pendants, or the royal clothing of the kings, or the chains around the camels' necks. Gideon made an ephod from the gold and put it in Ophrah, his hometown.
The Bible doesn't say exactly why Gideon did this. Some believe he had good intentions, and it was meant to symbolize Israel's great victory. And some believe Gideon was trying to glorify his name and raise the stature of his family, which of course had been the poorest of the tribe of Manasseh. Gideon eventually had 70 sons, for he married many wives. He also had a concubine with whom he fathered a son he would name Abimelech. Gideon refused to be king, yet gave his son a name that means, "My father is king." Gideon's story ends with mixed results. The golden ephod he made ended up turning into an idol itself that the people of Israel worshipped. Gideon's son Abimelech would go on to cause terrible disaster for the family. And after Gideon's death, the people would once again turn to the idols of the heathen nations. The good thing was that Midian never recovered, and Gideon ruled Israel as a judge for 40 years of peace. In the book of Hebrews, chapter 11 is often called the Faith chapter, or the Hall of Faith, or the Faith Hall of Fame. The unknown author of Hebrews spends chapter 11 celebrating the men and women of the Bible who put their faith in God. And listed there, in between Rahab and Barak, is Gideon, the mighty soldier himself. Pretty good for a man who thought he was going to spend the rest of his life threshing wheat at the bottom of a pit.